How's it going, everyone? In today's video, I'm going to be talking about your favorite poker hand to play, pocket jacks. I'm just kidding. Nobody ever says that their favorite hand to play is pocket jacks. And there's plenty of good reasons why it's a difficult hand to play. But the honest truth is, this is a very strong starting hand, and over the long run, you should be making money with it. If you're not, you're definitely doing something wrong. So before we jump into how to correctly play pocket jacks, let's first dive into answering the question, why do you hate it so much? So for starters, one of the main reasons why people don't like playing pocket jacks is because it's a very vulnerable hand. Not only is it vulnerable to overcards, but of course is also vulnerable to the same standard bad runouts that every hand is vulnerable to as well. In fact, by the river, pocket jacks is only going to be an overpair about 24% of the time. If we dive deeper into the numbers, there's actually going to be an overcard on the flop alone when you don't flop a set of jacks about 52% of the time. That means more than half of the time you're not going to flop a set, and there's going to be either a queen, a king, or an ace on the flop. That might be alarming to hear. 36% of the time is how often pocket jacks will be an overpair to the flop. And then 12% of the time, roughly, is when you're going to flop a set. So just keep this in mind, because more than 50% of the time, you're going to be dealing with an overcard on the flop. And as I already mentioned, even when it's an overpair on the flop, it's still going to be vulnerable to an overcard on the turn or river. So be ready to be outdrawn on and know how to react accordingly. So now that we know some of the numbers and percentages behind pocket jacks and the flop, let's now discuss why you hate playing this hand so much. And the honest truth comes down to, one, you're either playing it terribly wrong pre-flop, or you're just playing it terribly wrong post-flop. It's as simple as that. All right, I'm just kidding. It's not that simple. So let's talk about your pre-flop strategy with pocket jacks. The most common mistake that I see, especially in the lower limit live cash games, is that they're playing pocket jacks way too passively. Why are they playing too passively? Because they're scared of that 52% chance of the overcard hitting on the flop, right? Of course, they probably don't know that it's exactly 52% and all the numbers that we just went over, but they are dreading that overcard on the flop. And so their reaction, they do the opposite thing that they should be doing, and they start playing it even more passively. Instead of raising, they're limping, they're overcalling, they are not 3-betting, they're not 4-betting, and instead of isolating players out of the field, they're actually inviting more players to see the flop. They're inviting multi-way action. Whenever there's multi-way action, your equity decreases significantly, and guess what? You now have to potentially fade several more overcards than you would if you were just playing the pot heads up against one other opponent. So how do we fix this leak? Well, obviously you're going to have to be more aggressive with pocket jacks. You're going to have to start raising your hand first off. And if there's already an open raise in front of you, you should definitely be 3-betting pocket jacks majority of the time. The reason why 3-betting is excellent with pocket jacks is because, like I said, you can now isolate out the rest of the field and hopefully play this pot heads up. Pocket jacks, just like any other pocket pair, plays much better heads up than it does multi-way. And especially when you have an open raiser and a caller or multiple callers in front of you, if you're in later position with pocket jacks, you should 100% be looking to squeeze with a 3-bet here. The reason why this works so well is because we all know that all of the callers are pretty much capped with their range. We know that they don't have a big monster hand that they would 3-bet themselves with. So we can basically almost consider them dead money. And again, we're trying to isolate down the field just to get this heads up. And if you're in late position, you should definitely consider 4-betting with pocket jacks a lot more. I would especially consider it if the 3-bet, if the open and the 3-bet were also from later position. So for example, if the hijack opens, the cutoff 3-bets, and you are on the button, this is a spot where I would definitely consider a 4-bet. We know that the opener in the low jack position is opening pretty wide. We know that the cutoff is reacting to the wider opening range and 3-betting wider himself. So most of the time, our pocket jacks are going to be great here. Plus, they both have to play the pot out of position against us. If they are aware of that, they're going to be a lot more cautious, and we're going to be able to take the pot down either pre-flop here or play with a huge advantage going post-flop. The last thing I want to mention here regarding 3-betting and 4-betting pre-flop and all that is that when you're facing a 3-bet pre-flop, some players are just like, well, I just mentioned that you should definitely consider 4-betting, but you could also call a 3-bet depending on if the player that 3-bets is a tight player, obviously. But I see a lot of players get really scared of 3-bets, especially in like 1-3 and 2-5 live cash games. They just automatically think that the person 3-betting has pocket aces, pocket kings, or pocket queens, which is not the case. They could be raising with ace king or ace queen, pocket tens. There's a lot of hands that they could be 3-betting here with. So don't fold to a 3-bet unless it's like the tightest person in the world opening and 3-betting. But yeah, I do see people folding to 3-bets pre-flop pocket jack sometimes. It just doesn't make sense to me. Don't do that. So now let's talk a little bit about post-flop strategy. On the flop, if there's an overcard, again, 52% of the time, we're going to see an overcard and we're not going to have a set of jacks. We're going to have to play the hand pretty cautiously. But when we do flop as an overpair with pocket jacks, I like using a bigger size bet for a couple of reasons. First, we're going to be able to protect our hand against overcards, which can come on the turn or river. I think this is pretty self-explanatory considering we're expecting to be playing against hands like ace-king, ace-queen, or king-queen a lot of the time. And second, we're going to be able to get value from top pair type hands. Let's say, for example, if the flop is 9 high, we're going to hopefully get a lot of value from hands like ace-9, king-9, queen-9 that saw the flop. And there's a chance, especially at lower limit games, where the opponent is going to actually overvalue their own hand if they have a hand with top pair, and they might play back at us, and we're going to be able to get a lot more value that way. So playing it fast is the way to go. There are also draws and other things. Again, this hand, pocket jacks, is very vulnerable all the way to the river. So just keep that in mind. I like a big sizing when we flop as an overpair. One thing to look out for though on the flop are monotone flops, and when there are 3 cards to a straight. Basically, whenever there's a possibility of a made straight on the flop or a made flush on the flop, that's when we're going to play it cautiously, even when we have an overpair with pocket jacks. And there are plenty of reasons why we want to play it cautiously, but the main reason is because we could be obviously in a very bad spot where we're drawing pretty much dead already. But second of all, there are just so many hands that our opponents, especially at lower limits, they're just not going to be able to fold it. And I think that by waiting till the turn to make our big value bets, where their equity is significantly reduced, assuming they don't improve, we want a good turn card for us, obviously. But I think that's when it actually benefits us more to wait one street to extract that value. In general, when we have pocket jacks as an overpair, we're going to be looking to get 2 to 3 streets of value, assuming it's a safe run out for us on the turn and the river. It's going to be up to you, though, to determine whether or not you want to go for 2 or 3 streets. Obviously, it's going to depend on what the board texture is and what the run out is. If it's a good run out, we can potentially go for 3 streets. Or if it's against a very bad opponent, we could also target them for 3 streets of value if we think that they're just overcalling way too loose. But otherwise, you might want to consider checking on bad turn cards and then value betting the river, or you might have to check the river if it's a bad river. Anytime you have a good flop and then a bad turn or river, you basically just need to be able to adjust and try to get down to showdown value, because obviously pocket jacks usually has plenty of showdown value still, and you want to get to showdown as cheaply as possible in those scenarios. When we are an underpair with pocket jacks, we want to gain as much information as possible, which means we're going to be checking the flop a lot in position and out of position, because we can then see what our opponent does on the turn and whether or not we improve or not on the turn. What we don't want to do is force any unnecessary continuation bets. I think a lot of players think that because they were the pre-flop aggressor, they have to continue on the flop. That is simply not true. Information is always better, I think. And also, we don't want to really go for any thin value bets yet or force any thin value bets yet on the flop. We can save those for later on, like the river or maybe the turn sometimes. Just as a quick recap, pre-flop, we're going to play it aggressively. We do not want to play it passively, which invites other players into the pot. Multi-way action with any pocket pair is usually going to end poorly for us. We want to isolate down the field and take that advantage with us as the pre-flop aggressor to the flop. When the flop comes out and it's a good flop where we have an overpair, generally we're going to play it very aggressively unless it's a monotone flop or 3 cards to a straight on the flop. And whenever there's an overcard, we're going to play it cautiously. We want to get to showdown as cheaply as possible. We can still make thin value bets, but we're probably going to wait until the turn or river because we want to get as much information exactly where our opponent might be. So I hope this video helps. Guys, pocket jacks is just a pair. It's not complicated. It's not simple, but it's not complicated. Don't overthink it. Have fun with pocket jacks, make some money, let's go.